Lately, it seems like everybody, including Apple, Microsoft, and Google, have been using this new frosted glass or Glassmorphic UI design style. It's actually a lot easier than you may think, and if you stick around through the end of this video, I'll show you how to add that to any of your current projects, as well as show you how to make a Pomodoro timer. Let's get started. Thank you for joining me. This is Zach with ZachOS Tech, and today we'll be looking at how to make a Glassmorphic Pomodoro timer. Let's jump right into the code editor and get started. So I want to first start off by looking at the files that we have here. Let's look at the index.html. And by the way, if you need these files, you can click on the link in the description and it'll bring you to the repository that all these are stored on. You just have to download it. Or if you're following along from last week, you can go to the project directory and run git pull and then hit enter, and that should pull everything down from the GitHub repo. But if we look here, all right, we have the Pomodoro timer HTML. It's got a container. Inside that container is a div with the class of glass. It's got the class, the glass class. And basically that's the sheet of glass that we're going to see. And let me click go live so we can actually see what this looks like. Okay, so we have the Pomodoro button, we have the short break button, the long break button, the timer here in the middle, and then this toggle button that'll toggle between play and pause, or play and stop. So then if we look back at the code, this mode selector is just these three at the top, the three buttons, and then we have the timer control, which is the play and stop toggle. And then at the very bottom here, you notice that we have the timer, and it's not even in the same div as everything else. And the reason why we did that is because the way all the buttons are styled is using Flexbox. And so let's open style.css. Okay. So we're using Flex for glass, and we're doing space between. So it's pushing those buttons to the very outside of that container. And then it's giving it a padding of 10 pixels to give it this little bit of padding here on the top and the bottom. But the reason that we did that was because if we used Flexbox on the entire thing and ended up using this layout, it would push down the timer so it was down here. So I wanted the timer to be centered always. And so we gave it a position absolute to make sure that it was centered right in the middle of the screen. If you want to go through that more, feel free to, but that's about all you need to know about this so far. So if you hop into app.js, also we have this assets folder, and inside it we have the tomatoes picture that you see as the background. So one thing about styling the Glassmorphic design is that you want some type of colorful background that you'll be able to see, because if this was just like a gray background, you wouldn't actually get the same glass-like effect from it. And we'll go into more detail about the Glassmorphic design towards the end of this video. So if you can open up your app.js, let's get started by creating some constants. So the first thing we want to do is create constant timer at get element ID, and we named it timer. And this is just going off of how it's named in the HTML. So we want to target the mode buttons here at the top. So const mode buttons equals document.query selector class equals, I think it's mode selector. I think that's how we have it. Yep, mode selector. And then we'll do each of those buttons. So Pomodoro button dot get element by ID, because each is an individual button with its own ID. We didn't use get element by ID because the mode selector div doesn't have an ID. I'm going to use a shortcut, a keyboard shortcut in VS Code, Shift, Alt, and then down to copy the text to the next paragraph or the next line. And then if we highlight this text and then Control D on Windows, it'll highlight the next portion of text that matches that. So we can do short button, and then we can do the same thing for here, long button. We want to initialize seconds to be 0. So it's going to start off as 0, and then we'll set it equal to whatever timer we need it to be. So let's create an object that has all the different timers listed so that we can just do timer.pomodoro to get the value that we want the timer to be. Pomodoro 25, do short break. Let's do 5 for that. And then long break, 15. So these are just the standard values for a Pomodoro timer. And if you're not familiar with what a Pomodoro is, you basically work for 25 minutes and then you take a short 5-minute break, and then you work for 25 minutes, short 5-minute break. And once you do 4 Pomodoros, you take a long break. And that helps you stay focused better when you're working. So now let's create a function named Pomodoro. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is toggle this start and stop button. So what we have to do is main button. Oh, we didn't create. Okay, let's go back up here. Const main button dot, and what is this listed as? ID toggle. Okay, get element by ID toggle. Okay, now we say if main button dot class list dot contains, and we're going to say fa play, fa-play. So this project is using the Font Awesome package, and that's how we get this play icon. And in a minute, you'll see what it looks like with the stop icon. But they have probably thousands of icons that you can use by just looking up online what the naming structure is and just passing it in as like I class fa pause. Like this is how you can add a pause icon. Then we will essentially have to switch it to main button dot class list dot, we're going to replace with fa stop. Let's try that. Okay. Else replace fa stop with fa play. All right. But in order to get it to actually change when we click on the button, we have to add an event listener to the button. So we're going to do main button, doing an add event. Okay, we'll listen for the click event and run Pomodoro when it is clicked. Okay, so now it toggles between play and stop. What we'll also want to do is keep track. Right now, this play button has a data paused attribute and it's set as true. So we're going to want to toggle between that as well so that we can identify when this timer should be paused and should be unpaused. Let's do main button dot data set. All right, so now if we click this, now you can see it toggles between true and false up here. All right, and then what we're going to want to do is create another function inside the Pomodoro function called setTimer, but we're going to do an if statement, and we're going to test if timer.dataset.mode is equal to Pomodoro. And if so, we're going to set seconds equal to timer.pomodoro times 60. Then if timer.dataset.mode triple equals short, we want seconds to be equal to timer dot short break times 60. And then if it's not equal to either of those, then it's going to be equal to long. And so we can just do seconds equals timer dot long break times 60. So there's no way, we're not going to see the seconds in here right now. So if it's not paused, if paused is false, then we're going to want it to start counting down. So here we can run setTimer so that it gives it the correct timer. And the default data mode is Pomodoro. Okay, so that's why it set it to 25. You won't really see it change until we change the modes. So now we're going to do something called a setInterval. Okay, so we want to do a setInterval with this function, and then we're going to run it every 1,000 milliseconds. So every second it's going to run this function. So we're going to create a new variable called time remaining, and then we're going to set this equal to 0 plus math floor seconds divided by 60 slice -2 plus this plus 0. And I'll explain what I'm doing here in a second. %60 dot slice -2. Okay, so what this does here is we use the math floor function to round whatever seconds divided by 60 is. So if we have 300 seconds divided by 60, it's going to round down to 5 minutes. If we have 299 seconds, it's going to round down to 4 minutes. So this is giving us our minute value here. And then we concatenate a colon to it. And then we concatenate this part, which takes the seconds, and it does a remainder. So it'll return the remainder of seconds divided by 60. So 300 divided by 60 would be 5. So this would return us 0. But if you do 299 divided by 60, you would get 4 over here. And then this would return 59. Because that's what's left over after it rounds down. And then this dot slice -2 is starting from the right-hand side, and it goes 2 to the left, and that's what it will keep. So that is the reason why we add this 0 in the front. So it'll essentially give us 0, 5, 9, and then it'll slice the last 2 off of that. So if we do this and it gives us a, say like 1, it'll give us the 2 from the right, which will be 0, 1. So that will give us that leading 0 without us having to do any crazy like if statements in order to get that to work. And I use Prettier, so that's why I just formatted it, because I just hit save. And if you're using it, it probably shows the same for you. Okay, so after let equals time remaining, we're going to do timer.innerHTML, because timer is the yellow in the middle here. We're going to set that equal to time remaining. And then we're also going to do document.title equals, here we're going to use backticks, time remaining. And so we're going to say if timer.dataset.mode equals Pomodoro, then set this to work. Otherwise, set this to break. So what this is going to do is, if the mode of the timer is Pomodoro, it's going to say the time remaining up here where it says Pomodoro Timer, and then it's going to have a hyphen and then say work. And then once we switch to being in a break, it'll say 5 minutes break, and it'll count down so you can actually see it. And then the last thing we want to add before the end of this setInterval function is an exit statement so that it doesn't run forever. So if main button dot dataset dot paused is equal to true, and since it is a string in here, we have to pass in the string. We can't just say, like, this is not a truthy statement because it's a string. So we have to use the triple equals true string. And then we're going to pass in a clear interval and then reference this interval up here. And that'll basically stop the loop that we created. But if the timer reaches 0, it'll still keep counting down at this point. So we have to add an or, and then seconds equals 0. Okay, so this will either stop the timer if it reaches 0, or it'll stop it if we hit pause. And then if we do seconds minus minus, each second it will subtract 1 from the seconds variable. And then this will loop over again and it'll return just like that. So it'll update it each second. And then if we hit, it'll switch this to true and it'll stop the timer. Okay, and then if we start again, it should start back over at 0 because we ran this setTimer. And then it reset the timer back to 25 minutes. That's working pretty well. So now let's go to right above the Pomodoro function. And we're going to create a new function called changeMode. So the first thing that we're going to want to do when we hit changeMode is pause the timer. So let's do main button. We'll set that equal to true. And then we want main button.classList.replace because we want it to switch back to this play icon instead of the stop icon, since this is now paused. So we'll do FA stop and we'll replace it with FA play. And then we're going to do a for loop so that when we select the different modes, it'll get rid of this border and it'll highlight the active one. So I'm going to do this if it's greater than 3, and then let's get rid of this. Okay. Okay, that'll work properly. And then we'll do E. Let's make sure that we're passing in the event here. Okay, so let's go over why we passed in this entire line. Actually, to do that, we have to create another event listener here at the bottom. Mode buttons.add event listener. We'll listen for a click and we'll run changeMode. Let's console log E and see what we get here. I'm gonna comment this out just for a second. We'll go to console. Okay. So it's got a lot of information, but I essentially want to either create an object or an array with all these buttons so that I can loop through it, set them all to not be active, because here Pomodoro is set as the only active one. So we want to remove that from all of them and then add active to the one that was actually clicked. So to do that, we will go to path and then we'll go, it was path 1 and then children. And then we'll do 1, we'll loop over at 1, 2, and then 3. So that gives us all 3 of these buttons. So that's why we pass in I right here, because with this for loop, it'll be 0, it'll be 1, and then it'll be 2, and then it'll exit the for loop. It'll run it on this one, this one, this one. And we'll do ClassList.remove active. So if active is on there, it'll remove it. Make sure to pass in ClassList. If you just pass in remove, it'll remove the whole button altogether. After the for loop, we want to do e.target ClassList.add, and then we want to add active. Let's see if that works. Cool. Now we want to change the timer whenever we click on the different buttons. So let's start by creating another variable called mode, and we'll do e.target.dataset.mode. And then we can do timer.dataset.mode. timer.mode equals mode. So this is looking at the timer dataset mode, which is this value, and it's going to set it equal to whatever the data mode for the button is equal to. And then from there, we can do if timer.dataset.mode equals Pomodoro, then run timer.innerHTML equals, and then I'm going to use backticks for this so we can pass in the timer like that. Short break. And actually for the short break, I'm going to put a leading 0 just because this is the placeholder value for what timer is going to count down, just so there's not like a break in the timer actually showing. All right, so now let's test this out. Cool. It's still, so if we didn't put this leading 0 here and we hit short break, I don't like how it does that, but then once we actually run the timer, it would be adding this leading 0. It doesn't look good. So to fix that, I would just add this 0 there, and then when we go to short break, it adds the leading 0, and then we hit play and it starts counting down. So okay, so it's acting a little funky. If we play Pomodoro and then we switch to short break, it'll show us the timer for a second, and then it'll switch over after we hit play. Okay, let's run the 5-minute timer and then switch to Pomodoro now. No, it's still doing it. Make sure you remove any console.logs that you added. That's something that you want to make sure that you remove before you finish any project, just because it adds extra lines of code, and if somebody opens up your project that you're showing them and it's logging the console, then it doesn't look professional. So let's do Control F, console.log. I only have one line, so I'm going to remove this. Cool. Now, this basically has all of the functionality that we were looking for. We're able to start the Pomodoro timer. It shows up in this additional tab up here. It just doesn't switch between these modes automatically, so that could be a challenge that you can look into. You can work on implementing that yourself. And this funky, well, if you pause, then it lets you switch between them. But if you play and then switch, that's when it acts a little wonky. So right now I don't see where it's breaking in here, but it doesn't break the main functionality. So I'm okay with hitting stop before switching the mode and then hitting play if I'm going to use this myself. If you're able to find where the bug is in this, definitely leave me a comment below and I'll give you a shout out for that. But let's go ahead and look at the CSS needed to make this Glassmorphic design style. So if you crack open your style.css file and we scroll down to glass, it is basically these 4 lines. That is all we need to make this frosted glass design style. So if I was to comment these out and do a background of, say, gray, now we do not have that same glass style. But if I just add a background with an opacity, in this case I did 20%, and then I added a border so that you see this little shine of light going around this, and then we added the backdrop filter, which is basically putting a filter over the entire background of this container and setting a blur of 8 pixels on it. If you wanted to set that higher, you can. Set it to 15, and now you can hardly see it, or 20. And then usually with like Microsoft, like the start menu, they have a really high blur on it. So that's something that you can play around with, or you can make it more or less opaque. So you can kind of make it your own. You can customize it. One website that I really like is called Glassmorphism.com. And what this allows you to do, let me move my camera for a second. It allows you to set the blur value that you want, and you can see it up here with the text. So if we set blur to 6.0, you can change the transparency that you want. You could set the color. Let's say we wanted it to be purple. And then you can decide if you want it to show the outline that we did. And then you would just basically copy this and paste it right here. And then we have that frosted glass style that we were just talking about. I like the way that mine looked before, but definitely go and check out this website if you're interested in Glassmorphic design. And a big shout out to Albert Walicki. I hope I said that right, but this is something that he built, and I just think it's pretty awesome. It's a really useful tool. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you were able to follow along and make your own Pomodoro timer. If you did, I would love to see it. Please leave a link to it in the comments below. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.